How many times have we heard of the Frankenstein design? Without data, it's easy to say, well, Joe likes this and Jane likes that. Can you take what Joe likes about this and what Jane likes about that and put it together into one design? I think that gets people into a lot of trouble. I can tell you with confidence that half the redesigns that make it to market are worse than the design that they replace. And there's a decent percentage of those that you could almost see that exact cause. Even agencies will admit to me that we had to call it a day. It's not our best design, but we had a timeline and the client wanted something else and this is the best we can do. What if they were all different? What if everyone was focused on the same thing, which is the consumer?
Packaging design should seduce, inform, and even save the planet. I'm Hernan Braverman, and this is BRANDERMAN, the podcast where I talk with experts to uncover what it actually takes to make a positive impact on consumers, the market, and society. Warning: keep this podcast out of the reach of close-minded marketers and designers. Before the interview, let me introduce my design agency.
Brands with purpose. Human, agile, honest brands that leave no one indifferent. Tridimage creates and revitalizes brands to imagine and shape the future. Tridimage, the branding and packaging design agency for bold brands.
Today, I had an eye-opening conversation with Steve Lamoureux, founder and CEO of Designalytics, a company focused on developing next-generation solutions for design performance measurement to help brands grow through design. As a former brand manager at Proctor and Gamble, Steve's passions for package design research led him to establish Designalytics in 2018 to realize his vision of a syndicated, standardized design performance measurement and pre-market design testing solutions. In this episode, we unpack the key metrics and performance dimensions of package design and learn what it takes to create a winning design that captures consumers' attention and desire. Steve shares invaluable insights on how to pull on the emotional strings of consumers. We also discuss the importance of saying important things better than your competitors and measuring the emotional component of a product. Today with me, Steve Lamoureux. Steve, each of us is a container of ideas, projects, and dreams. However, we can't read the label when we are inside the jar. What do you think your label says, or what would you like it to say?
I guess I'd like it to say new and improved. Always new and improved. In truth, it probably says 20% more free. My diet has fallen apart. And after I drink this energy drink, it'll probably say 2x the caffeine. But hopefully the expiration date's long. That's all I could hope for.
Building a brand is like a journey. It starts with defining where we are and asking ourselves where we want to go. How was the path that led you from studying business to being a brand manager at Procter and Gamble to then deciding to found Designalytics?
When I was young, I wanted to be at an agency, a design agency, an ad agency. I had a creative streak. My mom was an artist. My dad was an entrepreneur. And the opportunity presented itself at Procter and Gamble in brand management, which in my mind, at least, it was an intersection of those two things that I was interested in. And then how that transitioned into a passion for package design is actually the origin story of Designalytics. And I can trace it back to sitting for most of the day on a Saturday watching hidden camera video of people shopping the facial creams and lotion shelf at a drugstore. 13 hours of watching people shop a shelf. And I think every brand manager and every designer should probably have something like that experience. It was a real epiphany to me because at Procter & Gamble, they trained you very, very well. There was no more disciplined company as far as I knew in terms of making important business decisions. You had data, you had training, you had a lot of resources around making smart decisions for your brands. But what I noticed in those 13 hours was it wasn't quite lining up, that there was something else. People were investigating their purchases in that category on that day. They would turn around packages. They would compare more than one. I don't think I saw a single person walk up to the shelf, find the product they usually buy, stick it in their basket and leave. And so that was a shock to me, right? Because the orientation back then was really around advertising and all the investments you make to get on that shelf and to have people aware of your brand before you get there. That epiphany of this mismatch between what's important and what drives those millions of tiny little decisions that people make, the data and resources that I had available to make sure I was doing the right thing around design, ultimately led me right to where I am today, which is starting a company that would fill that gap that I had as a 22-year-old. How can I better know, is my current design right? Who's doing it better? If there's a new competitor in that space, is that a threat to me? Is it an opportunity? Can I learn from them? You can't answer any of these questions without some objective insight. And so that ultimately led to Designalytics.
How did your passion for package design research begin?
Where I became passionate about it is probably, the first design test I ever did. And it's funny because the design in question was actually a new product we were about to launch. This was my project. We were in a final go, no go meeting. And then someone brought up some subjective comment about the package design. And everyone got scared enough that they hit the brakes and they said, we need to do some package design testing. My passion has come from the realization that there is something that can have a tremendous impact on whether or not you're growing or declining. It just needs somebody to figure out how to create that feedback loop for smart designers, for great brand managers, for strategists. So that's pretty much been the focus of my life.
Decoding buyers' relationship with design is a complex challenge. How much about package design does a professional market researcher like you need to know?
When it comes to research, especially with the design community, there's a lot of questions around whether or not you can trust consumers or data. And that's a well-deserved skepticism that the industry has. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we live at the crossroads of commerce and art. So what that means is, not ignoring the commerce part, how can research do a better job of predicting outcomes? As a researcher, especially when it comes to when you're inventing new methodologies for measuring things, keeping that in mind. And the easiest way I've found to predict outcomes is to start with the outcomes. It's something that not enough researchers are thinking about is how does this relate to what actually happens, right? We get into the science of what we're measuring and how we're measuring it. We build databases, we compare to the databases, we measure brain scans, we incorporate AI into the analytics. But at the end of the day, if you're not predicting what's going to happen from a business perspective, then we're not doing our jobs as researchers. And so we had a very clear mandate at Designalytics, and that was first track a lot of redesigns that occur in the market, hundreds of them. And when the results come in, i.e. 6 months later, when you see whether sales went up or down before and after that redesign, then you can work backwards and say, okay, well, what kinds of measurements did we make that was predictive of that outcome? The hard part is getting that data. You need that data set of what actually happened and tracking all these redesigns and when exactly did they launch so you can do the analysis correctly. So for me, to answer the question of how do you deliver value as a market researcher, it's either building the tools or applying the tools such that you can predict how consumers will react.
What does it mean that you measure package design on a syndicated basis? How does it enable better design performance?
A syndicated measurement is essentially we'll measure things that no one asked us to measure, right? And then we'll make those reports available. Where it plays a unique role for us is when you do that over a series of years, you create this observational data set of design performance across many different factors. There's findability and standout, the usual suspect. But then there's a whole bunch of other interesting things to consider, like what does the package communicate? How do people perceive it? Do they prefer to purchase the new package over the old package? So what syndicated means is we measure specifically 130 categories as of today, but it's continually growing. Within a category, we're measuring 12 different designs. Within those designs, we measure the new and the old design if they happen to change over the course of the year. Think of it as Nielsen or IRI syndicated scanner data. We're measuring these things and making them available. As an individual agency or designer or brand manager, You can't just snap your fingers and create research that studies your whole category over years. What it's done for us mostly is two things. Unlock what kind of metric should you be focused on when you're trying to make decisions between designs. But it can also prove that design has a tremendous impact on sales. That's actually the bigger picture here, because it's something that the industry, I don't think, has fully embraced. Even designers may not have fully embraced that, in fact, design has a tremendous impact on outcomes. Very often people will say, well, what about all these other factors? What about advertising? What about distribution? What about pricing? What about competition? But if you look at design, which, by the way, is integral to all those other things. I sat there with a stopwatch for the Super Bowl, and I timed the amount of time that a package was shown during those commercials. And there was something like 16 commercials. I think it added up to about $80 million was spent to put that package design in front of people on their TV screens during a football game. And so that's the thing that people don't understand, is that if that package design that's being shown is more compelling or more memorable or makes you hungry or makes you believe that your clothes are going to be clean, then you are more likely to purchase it when you get to the shelf. It's not just about the shelf. It's about all of those little stories and interactions and touch points that these brands have. Very much is transmitted through that package design. So in truth, now that I have all the data, now that we've had this syndicated look at the industry, we can prove very clearly that when you improve certain aspects of your package design, your sales will also improve. And that's really opening up a lot of new conversations at these companies.
Which package design metrics are most predictive of success in the market? Purchase preference, communication, find time, likability?
For many years, I think people were looking at the wrong things. So I can tell you that, for example, asking people how appealing a package is will tell you nothing.
Wow.
Yeah. And I can say that because the correlations are even less than zero, which would argue actually you want something that's a little less likable. So if that's the case, what is highly correlated to outcomes? Well, it's the other end of that spectrum, which is, what does it say? And is it saying it better than the competitors, right? Communication. And not communicating just anything, but given the category that you compete in, what is it that most people care about? Why are they making their decision? They have a dozen products to choose from, deliver that benefit or solve that problem, or make them feel the way they want to feel. If you can communicate those drivers of choice better than your competitors or better than your last design, you will see an increase in your sales. What that means is, if the secret here is saying important things better, you should know what the important things are, and then be very cognizant of how well you communicate those things, not in a vacuum, but relative to the other products that they can choose from. And then at the top level, what that leads to, which is another metric that we have, is purchase preference. By far, our most correlated item is purchase preference. And we do it in a very specific way. We have a purchase preference metric that is 96% predictive of up or down outcomes in the market. In part, it's so high of a correlation because we simply work backwards from the answer.
Can you briefly explain the key performance dimensions you evaluate using Designalytics research?
We actually measure a lot of different angles of design because our orientation is really around growth. You can think of those in certain groups. The most predictive group is what we call conversion metrics. So this is the ability to create a heightened desire for a product. Another one is communication, which we've also talked about. And there's a third one in that set, which is called associations and sentiment. It basically fills in the gaps that we have for our communication exercise. So we are able to measure the communication of important things better, right? That secret to success. There's a small blind spot for brands for whom the emotional component is important. And so that third piece just basically says, okay, you're going to be staring at a white screen here. And then when you click the button, you're going to see something just like the old Rorschach ink blot tests. And what we want to know is the first thing that comes to your mind. And so what you can do is look at what that first thing is that came to their mind and detect any kind of emotion behind it. So they say delicious, yummy, awesome, great, love. Obviously, those are all positive. And then there's other words like, boring, dull, plain. So those are the negative words. You can understand what is the overall emotional component of that product. Now, does that matter in Band-Aids? Probably not. Does it matter in baby food? Absolutely. Dog food is a great example. There was a redesign on the Hill Science Diet brand in the US. That was their secret, was they always had a great reputation. It was veterinarian recommended, but it wore a heavy white lab coat, if you will. And so what they did with a redesign they had done, they found the very best pet photographer in the world and just had him go to town and just showcase these incredible images of dogs, very large on the package design. Still had the lab coat, but now it was, a lab coat wrapped in a furry exterior. And that drove a lot of emotion for the brand. That brand grew $100 million in the next 12 months, and the 12 months after that, and the 12 months after that. There's traditional metrics that everyone measures, which is standout and findability. We call those capture metrics. Why are they important? Because if you're not seen, you can't be bought. But it turns out that increasing conversion is a much larger lever for growth than being seen by 5% more people. In theory, if you're seen by 5% more people, then maybe you can grow your business by 5%. But you could double your business, you could triple your business if you can affect the conversion. Because the truth is that people on average see roughly 6 or 7 products in the first 4 seconds at the shelf. Getting better than 1/6 the conversion rate can really turn into massive growth for your business. The third set of measures here really get into mental availability and distinctive assets, and even down to the design element engagement. You can do eye tracking research and find out what people look at, but that won't tell you what they're thinking when they look at it. So we have element engagement and resonance exercise that allows you to really understand, is there something on my package that should stand out more? But even though it's, small and obscure on the package, a high percentage of people notice it and really like it. Well, that can be an interesting diagnostic as you try to improve your package design. What is polarizing? What's the most engaging part of my package design? So there's some diagnostic elements that aren't about growth necessarily, but more about how do you make refinements and tweaks that'll get you to growth. Everything we do is what's considered a behavioral exercise. What is that? It's not a survey. We don't ask a question with a 5-point answer. They're all games and exercises and images, and it's quite engaging and fun actually to take our research. In terms of the data that behavioral exercises creates, it can be both quantitative and qualitative. Certainly the most predictive measures we have are quantitative. They lend themselves to that kind of an analysis. If you're testing 3 designs, which of these is most likely to drive growth for my business? We could tell you that on a quantitative basis. But more interesting is, if I were to do it one more round, how could I do even better? And so that's the qualitative metrics that come from, for example, in our purchase preference exercise. It's simple, it's fun, it's behavioral. You're looking at 2 different products. It's essentially for the same product. They look different. And the consumers are asked to imagine you're shopping, and both these products happen to be on the shelf at the same time. Which of these 2 would you rather buy? Fairly straightforward answer. In research terms, it's called a forced choice. Immediately after they make that choice, we said, well, why did you choose that and not the other one? And now we have hundreds of consumers from memory, because they can't see the packages anymore, telling us why they made the choice that they did. And some people will choose A and some will choose B. And now you get to learn why people who chose A, and vice versa. So that's the qualitative piece that comes from what is otherwise a quantitative exercise. The third piece to that particular exercise is really important, and it's our secret sauces in terms of weighting things, is whether or not you'd be likely to buy that brand at all. We asked you to imagine these 2 products on the shelf, but are you really going to buy Coors Light when you're a Bud Light guy? And so you use the clues, including how quickly they made their choices. That gives us a lot of clues to work off. By reverse engineering what's actually predictive is how that became our most predictive exercise. So one of the things that makes this such an engaging exercise for consumers is also a really innovative trick that we've incorporated into our product. We call it first view quality. But what that boils down to is, if you were to take one of our studies, we would not be spending the next 12 minutes talking about energy drinks, right? Every exercise we do is on another category, another brand, another design. And it does a lot to clean up the data. It also does a lot to make it interesting for consumers who are engaged in this research.
Brand design is the most consequential and the least understood marketing asset. The issue with package design has never been a lack of impact. It's been a lack of measurement. When is the right moment to embed research throughout the package design process? Is it better to inform the creative brief than to test early creative routes, for example?
Because we're relatively new and people may discover us mid-process, is that when they join us mid-process, I have one example where an agency provided us with 9 different designs that they were thinking early in the process, and all 9 failed. The current design was better than any of the 9 they came up with. And they were great designs, and they certainly followed some of the major trends in the marketplace. But when that happened and you read the verbatim responses from consumers, you realize, oops, okay, the brief might not have been exactly right. We made some assumptions that focused our effort in the wrong place. That speaks to the importance of learning in the beginning how people react to the current design and its competitors. So that can be tremendously helpful in terms of saving time, getting to the right answer quicker with a good creative brief. That said, the next stop in the process, which really has always been our goal, we think that most of the value comes from the early to mid stages. It's where you're supposed to be exploring and iterating, right? And so if you have a creative brief, there's a number of ways to answer that brief. And the best thing you can do on a first round is to try north, south, east, and west, right? They're all trying to get to the same destination, but maybe with different approaches, different hierarchies, different elements. Maybe some are closer in to the current design. Maybe some are, going out further than that. So if you do that first round with something that's predictive, so focus groups, not so predictive. Great for certain things, not great for understanding which direction is most likely to succeed. 8 people in a room, 16, you do as many focus groups as you want. It's never going to be that helpful. But if you can have a tool that is highly predictive of ultimate outcomes, and you can apply that during that experimentation phase, that can put you on the right path very quickly, even if it's the wrong path. So that example I gave of 9 strikeouts in a row, sorry to use the American analogy there, even in that case, in the very next round, they were able to be in the top 10% of our database because of what they learned in that experimentation phase. So you don't even need to have a winner in that first round. You just need to try a bunch of different things. And when you realize, what worked and what didn't work and understand why things worked and didn't work, as a creative, you will be inspired with the right answer, or at least inspired with some pretty good hypotheses. Doing that can shorten the process. It can bring the client on board, right? We know a lot of times you present work and it just comes down to you've got multiple people in that meeting and they all have different opinions. And then they try to, come to some kind of a consensus, and that's no way to design something. But if you come to them with the different designs and how consumers are reacting to them, suddenly they find themselves on the same page very quickly. So it can be efficient. It certainly can end better because now you're designing for the consumer, not for the client team necessarily, or for your peer group. So yeah, it's that early stage before you start. And importantly, in that experimentation phase, having good, reliable research can really make the difference.
That's great. Yeah. That's the way that we designers can find inspiration in the space between creativity and analysis. For brands who want to do a package design overhaul but don't know where to begin, when should they consider to make a revolution instead of just an evolution?
My general answer is try them both and see which one works, because there's a good chance you're going to be wrong. And if you just pick one, but if you can test that range, the great thing with the big bets or big changes is not necessarily that it will be the right answer, but you'll learn something, right? I hear of clients giving a number between 1 and 10. Where are we on evolution versus revolution? We're about a 5 or 6. And so then the creatives go off and they design something that's in that theoretical space. When in fact, maybe you should be doing 3 to 9, broaden that space, at least early on. Because otherwise, how did you arrive at that number? Is it fear driving that number? On the flip side, some people are a little too fearless and they're willing to make big bets with a brand that's been around for, 100 years and oops. So really the evolution versus revolution, as well as, any of the other spectrums that you can think of in terms of designing, you can test your way there. The one humbling thing I learned is that even after having tested thousands of these designs, my ability to predict how consumers are going to react has gotten no better over the years. I'm woefully bad at that game. It's a little humility that we all need to have sometimes when you're in this space, when you're at the intersection of art and commerce.
Why did you decide to host the Design Effectiveness Awards?
Oh, I can remember the exact spot. I was in London talking to Andrew Gibbs, who is the founder of the Die Line. And I had seen what had been done in Europe. DBA does a great job focusing on effectiveness. And we didn't really have the equivalent of that in the US. And so I mentioned to him that, you really should have like a Die-Line award for effectiveness. And we could help you with that because one, we can get the scanner data and find out who grew after their redesign. And two, we can compare to how consumers reacted to it so that we know that the design was at least playing a role in that success. We've been doing it ever since. It's one of our favorite things to do. It's just amazing to see great design that translates to great business.
That's great. What sets apart a great package design from a good one? What qualities must a design have to stand out and be distinctive?
Well, here's the great thing. I could tap a few keys on my keyboard and look at 550 redesigns and go to the very best of those and look for patterns among the best. And I can do the same on the worst if I'm trying to avoid mistakes.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a silver bullet here, but some of the common successes that I've seen, if you're in food, make people hungry. That kind of goes without saying. It's remarkable how many people don't think about that. If you're in an emotional category, find a way to pull on the heartstrings of consumers. Other things that we've seen consistently do well. There was one of the best redesigns we saw was for Dove Baby body wash. And where previously it very much followed the brand standards of adult Dove products, this one got more playful and consumers really reacted. I really think that at the end of the day, what designers use both strategically, but also creatively, it's just create a safe space where you can try those things out and try them out in front of consumers and you'll be surprised and sometimes delighted and sometimes disappointed. But that's what you're there for. You're there to try those, perceive value for the products that you're designing for.
Steve, what is the worst design crime you have ever seen or perhaps committed?
Oh, goodness. I guess, a couple things come to mind, but hubris is probably pretty high on the list, right? When we've seen spectacular business failures out there that might have had design to thank, a lot of times somewhere in there, there's some hubris from a brand manager, from a group of people, from the agency. It's this idea that subjectivity is fallible. And so if there's a crime out there, it's someone who's a little too good at convincing other people of their way of thinking, right? You're going to count the penalty in the tens of millions of dollars when it comes to business results for decisions that are made not based on the consumer, but rather other factors. I take issue with bad research. Right. What bad research has done to the CPG industry, it's enabled them to not think of design as being as important as it is. Right. So if you have research that doesn't really connect to the outcomes, but is trusted, then what you end up with is, well, okay, so half the time after a redesign, I succeed and half the time I fail. It's clearly not the design because my trusted researcher said it was A-okay. There's a much bigger crime involved here where people, I can't even say they lose faith. They never had the faith. They think of the design as just dressing, right? When I was a brand manager, I inherited a brand. Most brand managers inherit a brand. And then usually one of two things happens. They either just accept the package design for what it is, or they want to change it dramatically so they can put their fingerprint on it in the 18 months they have before they're on the next assignment. And so neither of those is necessarily the right answer.
Now, I propose we play a game. As you know, a ping pong table is a must in many creative studios. So I will make you a series of brief questions and you have to choose one or another concept. And if you want, you can explain why you choose it. Are you ready for BRANDERMAN ping pong?
I am ready.
I'm a marketer or I am a researcher?
Ooh, a marketer. I'm a marketer who appreciates research.
A marketing conference or a branding conference?
Oh, branding. Yeah, branding.
Qualitative or quantitative?
Absolutely both. Quantitative can only tell you that you're making a mistake. Qualitative tells you what mistake you made.
Focus groups or gut feelings?
Oh, neither.
Conceptualization or execution?
That's a tough one. Execution. I saw a sticker on a package the other day, and the words I could read said 100% ocean-bound plastic, which I took to mean that the company would come by my house when I was done with the product and throw it in the Pacific Ocean. So sometimes The best ideas die in execution. So I'm going to say execution.
Research for a big established brand or for a small emerging brand?
I like the challenges of both. For a small brand, packaging is everything. So if it comes down to where can I create the most value, I think it's the small brand. And there's a lot of exciting challengers out there that have something new to say or have a new approach to an old problem. The downside of that, it's exactly the same people that think they've got to figure it out, that their gut is enough to take them to the finish line. So with that regard, I like the big companies. Sorry to be non-committal on that one. I think the ball just went by me.
Leading researchers or continuing to research all your life?
I'd like to lead researchers. I think I'll make a bigger footprint if I can get more people to think about some of the things I think about.
Remote work or face-to-face work?
I miss face-to-face work so much. It's a reality of today, but yeah, I do miss the human interaction for sure.
And finally, great market researchers are born or great market researchers are made?
Oh, they're made. Who's born a market researcher?
Yeah. What defines a good package designer for you?
Gosh, someone who has a passion for what they do, can think strategically and is open to finding out that they're wrong. And knowing that they'll be wrong half the time takes a lot of, it explores the space and discovers along with the consumer. I think that's what makes a great designer, honestly.
What is the biggest mistake you see brands make when redesigning their brands and packaging?
In 2 words, it would be compromise and subjectivity. I'm reminded of the first time that I ever heard someone talk about package design. It was one of my first days on the job at Proctor and Gamble. This guy who's as old as I am now was showing his excitement for this new Clearasil package design. And Clearasil is an acne medication that I was probably still using at the time. And it just shocked me that the person was having the greatest influence on this design was someone who was so far removed from me as a target consumer for that product. That subjectivity, you can't necessarily trust your own gut. You really can't. Because very often we're odd ducks. The creatives and the brand managers out there, we're not like the average person. And so the subjectivity can get you in trouble. And then the compromise is the other piece. How many times have we heard of the Frankenstein design? Without data, it's easy to say, well, Joe likes this and Jane likes that. Can you take what Joe likes about this and what Jane likes about that and put it together into one design? I think that gets people into a lot of trouble. I can tell you with confidence that half the redesigns that make it to market are worse than the design that they replace. And there's a decent percentage of those that you could almost see that exact cause. Even agencies will admit to me that we had to call it a day. It's not our best design, but we had a timeline and the client wanted something else and this is the best we can do. What if they were all different? What if everyone was focused on the same thing, which is the consumer?
How can brands future-proof their identity when brick and mortar is being replaced by e-commerce?
We've been studying a lot what you can do differently with your digital product from your physical product. The industry has followed some interesting trends. At first it was, we don't need all this small type on the package. You can't read it anyway. And so people are coming up with super simplified designs. That had an unintended consequence of people didn't take the design seriously. Even though you can't see those things, just seeing that it has some depth to it, I think consumers lost something when we did that. And then there was the realization that your physical product is confined to the dimensions of the product. So a tube of toothpaste is going to be short and wide, and the wine bottle is going to be narrow and tall. But the space that you have to fill online is a square because it has to accommodate both of those, which means there's a lot of white space. And so the brands that are doing really interesting things are asking themselves, how can I use that space? And what can I learn from my physical pack and how people react to it and amplify that with that white space? And so they have call outs, they have claims, you might have lifestyle imagery. If you're trying to future-proof the brand, it's really simply to think about them almost as 2 different products, your physical product and your digital product. Do they need to be identical? No, they do not. Do they need to be recognizable? Absolutely. But yeah, they're different challenges.
Steve, we are facing a technological revolution in package research. Do you think the use of artificial intelligence will ever replace category buyers' questionnaires?
I think it'll help a lot. If I look at the immediate future, we already use AI to help with our analysis. Take, for example, if you needed to read a bunch of open-end statements on why people like a design. Well, unless you're doing that in a single sitting, enough focus that you can pick out the patterns in all those disparate responses you get from consumers, you might miss something. Well, AI doesn't get tired. It doesn't lose focus. It can plow through hundreds, thousands of those types of statements and be able to detect the patterns and summarize the patterns so that people can walk away with the right interpretation. Using AI to predict a great design or to actually design a great design, maybe that day will come. But here's the thing. AI is only as good as the data it can train on. If you're the son of Tiger Woods, chances are you're going to be a pretty good golfer. And so that's the rub when it comes to design research is if there are no good databases out there, and if there's no good learning data, if not using AI is only right 50% of the time, AI trained on that data is only going to be right 50% of the time. That will change as the data sets get better. And so I can imagine that being more useful. But when it comes to design in the near term, I think it's just having smart people with access to feedback from the target audience and the ability to experiment in a reliable laboratories is going to get you some great design. God knows, like, there's people out there that are just so talented. A lot of your guests are just amazing people that I follow and am inspired by. They're going to create most of the magic. All I can do is give them a laboratory in which to experiment, and they're going to come up with great experiments and great outcomes.
Tell me something about package design that's true, but that almost nobody agrees with you on.
I think the thing that a lot of people are conditioned to disagree on is whether or not design drives business outcomes and the degree to which that happens. There's a common belief that all the other factors are not accounted for, and therefore you can't say that it was design. But design is integral to all those other factors. How can you ever isolate the impact of design? If you step back and say, well, okay, how can design be effective? It's not just on the shelf at that moment of truth. It's in just about everything. We talked about it before. The arguments that I have are twofold. One is people tell you consumers can't tell you what they want. And my problem with that statement is that they're not finishing the sentence, which is until they see it and they can buy it. Because the truth is consumers tell us what they want every day, millions of times a day. It's in the sales results. If you can tap into that dynamic, they can tell you what you want, but not before you show it to them. The other thing I take issue with is this idea that you can't isolate the impact of design. And they're both right and wrong. They're right in that it is not an isolatable thing, but that is not to say that it is not having a huge impact because it's making everything else work better. All those other factors that people point to, which is the reason why you can never prove that design is effective, in fact, use design to be effective. If you're spending $1 million on an ad campaign and it features a product that doesn't really convey the promise that the ad is setting up, you're wasting your $1 million. If, however, that package design gets people's attention, it makes sense that that's a product that would deliver that benefit, then you're going to make more than $1 million for that investment. Those are two common myths, I think, in this space that I'm often getting into the arguments.
If you could just take a pill and learn any subject, anything, what would it be?
How to speak Spanish, so I could do this podcast in Argentinian tongue.
What is the most important thing on your to-do list for your professional life? What is your next adventure?
Well, I've been on this adventure for 35 years, so I'm not sure that's going to change anytime soon. I think we have a lot of ground to go, for people like yourself and your listeners to be understood and respected for the value that they're creating in the world. That's not something that's going to change overnight. So that's what I'm focused on for some time now.
Steve, it was a pleasure having you on here on BRANDERMAN. Thanks for showing that design drives growth and for giving designers actionable insights that help us create better packaging. You are really bridging the gap between research and design.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. I appreciate it.
I hope you have enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. You can check the episode notes for all the relevant links. I also invite you to follow me on Instagram and on my website, branderman.design. Follow the podcast in your favorite app so you don't miss the next episode of BRANDERMAN, the podcast where we try to uncover how to make a positive impact on consumers, the market and society through package design.